So I'm Angela. I'm a theoretical physicist, and I also read a lot of books. Like, actually read those. They're not just sitting over there. So when I heard about this book, I had to read it and also take notes on it, like a psycho, because this book is a romance novel where a theoretical physicist falls in love with an experimental physicist, and hijinks, miscommunication, like hardcore sex in this book. So I want to talk about it. This book is very long. This is a huge book. It's too much to read. It's too much to like go through the whole plot because so much happens in this book. So before I go through the plot, I just want to introduce you to the characters. Okay, so this is Elsie. She looks like this. She is a theoretical physicist. She just got her PhD. Now she works as an adjunct. And because adjuncts are exploited, they're paid horribly. It's a total scam. I made a whole video about it. She has to do sex work to make ends meet. So in addition to like teaching 4 classes at 3 different schools, she has an app where she goes on fake dates with men and like pretends to be their girlfriend in exchange for money. She also has diabetes. Also, she has this wild family issue where like she has twin brothers who are older than her, and they're both dating the same girl, and they have like these weird public like fist fight, like adult men having fist fights. And then her mom calls her to be like, you need to handle this situation with your brothers. And it's insane. It's the craziest thing I've ever heard, and like it doesn't come up that often, but like it's specifically that. And because of that, Elsie couldn't leave Boston because she has to take care of that. So she couldn't leave Boston, so that's why she's an adjunct. She has one friend who's her roommate, who's an academic. She's getting her PhD, I think, in film. So Elsie has to watch these like old boring movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey, and because of the family thing, Elsie pretends to like the movies, I think. So, like, this person is her best friend for years, and they live together, and they both use the same app to make money doing sex work, and they spend all their time together. But according to the main character, Elsie, this woman knows nothing about her. Like, she wears a mask and pretends to be a friend the whole time. And apparently, that's how she is with everybody. Like, the plot of the book is that the main character has never had a single real relationship with any human person. She's always pretending. Like, since she was a child, she's always been pretending to be a person, like whatever that person wants her to be. And she blames this on diabetes. Like, it's the diabetes that has done it. Diabetes in the year 2024. A very treatable illness. Like, you can't cure diabetes, but you can treat it. But somehow it's caused her deep psychological harm. Also, she likes cheese, like a lot, and also the movie series Twilight, like a lot. Okay, so our main love interest is Jack, but he's blonde, so he looks like this. And he's an experimental physicist, and he works at MIT as a professor. He's the brother of the guy who Elsie goes on fake dates with, but because she always pretends to be a different person, she was pretending to be a librarian when she met him, and so that comes up later. When Jack was like 17, so like 15 years ago, he wrote a fake journal article on theoretical physics, and he submitted it to a real journal, and it got published. Like, it made it through peer review. And because of that, since this happened, like the field of theoretical physics has like been on a down spiral where funding's being cut, professors are being cut, and people have lost respect for theoretical physics. And that's his backstory. When I did this section with Elsie, I had that little bit where I was like, she's never had a human connection with another person. She's incapable of forming a relationship. She's lying 100% of the time. And then I was like, she likes cheese. You would think this part of Jack's backstory was the most serious. Like, that's pretty serious. That's a huge detail, but it's not. So Jack's mom was a theoretical physicist, and now he's an experimental physicist. Oh my goodness. But she was in grad school, and she was brilliant, and she got her ideas stolen by her advisor. And because of that, she left the field and she got married to Jack's dad, who's like kind of an absent dick, basically. And then she died. Then immediately his dad gets remarried and they immediately have a baby. So Jack has a brother who's like a year younger. And for some reason, the entire family decided that it was best for him if they just lied and said that the stepmom was his mom, except the stepmom like hated him. So Jack's childhood is him growing up thinking his mother hates him. And then one day she's like, I'm not your mother, which is insane to say to a child. And so now he grew up thinking that his mother hated him, but really everyone he loved lied to him his entire life. And then he finds out that his mom was a theoretical physicist, so that's why he wrote the letter. And because none of these people have gotten therapy, he just lives with that. Like, he just lives with the fact that no one in his family loves him and everyone's been lying to him for his entire life, except for his brother, who he also doesn't talk to that much but pretends to have a relationship with. This is the backdrop for the story about the quirky work romance of the theoretical physics and the experimental physics. Okay, so now I'm going to go through some of the plot. I'm going to skip. There's just so many things that happen in this book. It's like a lot of things that happen. You should know going in that he's really, really big and she's really small. And he's like big, but she's small. That's good to know for the future. So Elsie's on a fake date. Like, she's doing her part-time job of sex work. And what's really strange about this is that Elsie, the main character, specifically says she's not doing sex work. I just think it's really weird that the plot of this book is sex work, but the main character is like, absolutely not. Let me just read it to you. Hang on. I also don't kiss, fraught, dirty talk, get naked, do butt stuff, give BJs, HJs, TJs, and whatever other Js might exist that I'm not aware of. I don't let them pee on me or fondle my feet, nor do I facilitate and or allow orgasms in my general vicinity. Not that there would be anything wrong. Sex work is legitimate work, and people who engage in it are just as deserving of respect as ballerinas or firefighters or hedge fund managers. So we're only 3 pages into this book, and I'm having like a detour, but it's weird. The main character does sex work, but doesn't realize she's doing sex work, and it's so pointed. Like, the main character is saying to the audience, like, this is not sex work, even though it definitively is. So I thought that as part of the book, she was going to realize, like, oh my gosh, I've been doing sex work this whole time. And she was going to realize her other job, adjuncting, which she thinks is in academia, is not in academia. It's like a scam. Like, I thought that was going to be the plot of the book. Like, things are not what they seem. Like, the job you're doing says it's like you're a professor, but you're not a professor. I thought that was going to be the plot, but it's not. It never comes up again. I think the author just didn't want you to think that the main character was a slut, which is super feminist. Super feminist. What a great way to start this book on page 3. So she's at this like family party with the fake date who she's becoming friends with, and she plays Go with his brother, and the brother ends up being Jack. Neither of them disclose that they're physicists. He thinks she's a librarian. She doesn't know what he does. And she also faints in the kitchen from her diabetes, which is completely uncontrolled throughout this whole book. And he catches her, and he like shoves cookies in her mouth or whatever. She finishes that, and she's like all excited because she has this job interview for a professor position at MIT, which is great because she can't leave Boston, and also she hates adjuncting. She hates teaching. She hates students. For some reason, she wants to be a professor. So she's preparing for this interview, and academic professor interviews are like this huge multi-day deal. Like, you go to dinner with the people you're going to work with. You usually do a teaching demo. You do like a seminar that's like high-level science, and then you'll also do a colloquium that's like graduate student level science. And you do 30-minute interviews. Like, it's a full day, like 30 minutes with one person, 30 minutes. It's like a whole thing. So that's what's happening. And it ends up with Jack being like, you're not a librarian. You're lying to my brother. I'm going to tell everyone. And she's like, you can't. This is the comical misunderstanding. because the brother could explain that actually she's doing sex work. He paid her to go to the dates with him, but he can't because he's like on some kind of work, no phone retreat. So it's like comical misunderstanding the whole time. So that's why Jack hates Elsie. He thinks she's lying to his brother, which is the only family member he cares about. She finds out that Jack's the one that wrote that article 15 years ago. One small child toppled all of theoretical physics, and now there's no funding for theoretical physics. There's no theoretical physics positions. There's only experimental physics positions, which can apparently be done completely independently of theoretical physics. Like, as if you could do those things without each other. But we'll get to that. So they hate each other. And they keep being pushed together because she's trapped in this 3-day-long job interview. He has to take her on a tour around the school. And there's this really weird scene. He's like, okay, where am I supposed to take you? Because, like, you have a schedule. Like, some secretary in the office, he's, like, made up your schedule of the 30-minute interviews. And you're supposed to take that around. And you like, meet with Jack. And then you're like, oh, I'm going to this guy's office next. So she looks at her schedule. And it's a tour of the labs. And she's like, it's a lab tour. But I'm a theorist. And it's just, like, I don't know a single person I've ever met in my life who, given the opportunity to tour a bunch of physics labs, would say no. Like, it's a baffling character choice. Like, oh, you know that stuff you work on? Like, you're at home working on your theory, doing your computer simulations, and you're looking at all that physics stuff. Do you want to see it in action in the labs? No. It's just, it's a baffling character choice. Like, this story, it doesn't make sense, but we'll get there. So she faints again, just completely uncontrolled diabetes. Maybe this book is supposed to be a commentary on how adjuncts don't make enough money and poor people have unequal access to healthcare. Maybe we're going to talk about that. Maybe that's what this book is about. Maybe that's why she keeps fainting. Maybe she'll die, and that's the point of the story. Okay, so then she does a teaching demo, and I kind of just want to take you through this passage a little bit. She loads her PowerPoint. The class is 90% male. I will say there's like a lot of talk about like being a woman in physics, and I guess that's what makes it the STEMinist book. She's talking a lot about her like pretending to be other people and how that gets hard when you're doing like class instruction. Like, who do you pretend to be when there's 30 people in the room? But she's gonna pretend to be like a guy's guy, physicist, I guess, because like that's what you have to do when you're a woman. She says, since this class deals with current topics in physics, I've prepared a lecture on Wigner crystals, a highly discussed, and then a student groans out loud. Like, she's teaching the class, but because it's a job interview, the whole hiring committee is also in the class, and there's a grad student is a student, but grad school is a job, so he is an employee of the school, and he's just like, ugh, theoretical physics. I did not come to physics graduate school at MIT to learn theoretical physics. No, thank you. So, like, there's this guy, Cole, and he's like, are you going to talk about the topic of Wigner crystals from a theoretical perspective? Like there's any other way to talk about a physics topic? And he's like, excuse me, but I have a question. My question is, what's the point of all this? Isn't it a bit useless talking about theories for hours? Shouldn't we focus on actual applications? And it's just like, that's not... If this adult man was talking like this to someone they were thinking of hiring, surely all 5 people in the room who were on the hiring committee would be like, get out of this classroom, and then they would reprimand him, like on his record for the school, like a disciplinary action of like, you are an employee. You cannot act like this. That was inappropriate behavior. One more time and you will be kicked out of school. Like, it's really weird that they just let him do that. And then the student says, theorists just hide behind fancy math. What I don't get, what's the point of building abstract theories that are not even bound by the laws of nature? That's like a different guy. Like, they're all ganging up on her. They're like, experiments are way more useful. You only care about what might be, but not what actually is. The possible applications are always an afterthought. Again, They're just ganging up on her. And she's just standing there. And they're like, oh, this is a test of how you behave with students. And it's just like, these are adult men. Like, grad school is not like high school with children where they're like, what's the point of learning algebra? Like, they all decided to go to physics grad school. This whole idea doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. But then she decides to be not like other girls, but she makes it okay by saying, oh no, I'm doing a thing that's not like other girls. And she does the Feynman sex quote. What you guys are saying is that theoretical physics doesn't always end in a product. And to that, all I can say is that physics is like sex. It may yield practical results, but often that's not why we do it. Ew. And then the author is like, at least that's what Feynman once said. He's also on record as calling women worthless bitches, but we'll let it slide since his quote made you laugh. And it's like, really? You're letting it slide? You're sexually harassing all the students by talking about fucking in the middle of a lecture. It's inappropriate. Yikes. Ew. No. Why is the hiring committee letting this happen? Ew. I hate it. I hate this. I hate this book. It was too early for me to drop that I hate the book. Pretend I didn't say that. Okay, so she does the teaching demo and everyone's like, wow, you really killed it with the Feynman sex quote. And then she does her like science talk and everyone's like, wow, what an amazing science talk. Really good. You're doing so good. And then the funniest line in the book happens. The funniest moment in the entire book. She gives her talk on her crystals, which the author doesn't talk about at all. Like, what science are they doing? It just says crystals. She gives her talk on the theoretical crystal model she's developed. And then everyone claps. Everyone's like, whoa, amazing. And I forgot to mention, she's like a really good scientist. She's adjuncting even though she just finished her PhD. She won a huge award. And she also just casually drops that she had a cover story in the Nature journal. Like, she was on the front page of Nature, which is like such a big deal. So few scientists ever achieve that. Like, if you did that in grad school, you would get 55 million job offers. Like, it's insane how capable this physicist is supposed to be. Like, everything she does, she just fucking nails. She's the smartest person in the room. That's what's happening here. So she gives her a talk and she's like, here was my theory on crystals. I don't know, guys. What do you think? And everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And the funniest line in the book happens when Jack is talking to like a grad student and he's like, we're going to use this model. We're going to use Elsie's model. And she says, wait, are you serious? You're really going to apply my model? And he's like, of course. And she's like, but it's a purely theoretical model. What other type of model would you use? What do you think physicists do? Do you think experimental physicists have different models than the theoretical physicists? What do you think a model is? What is happening? Why would... She doesn't get the job. Of course she doesn't get the job. We know she doesn't get the job from the first line. Like, she's an adjunct. She's never going to get hired as a professor. I made a whole video about that. The main character, Elsie, is surprised she doesn't get the job. And she's very sad, which is shocking. Because she's supposed to be so smart and so capable and know everything, even though can't control or manage her diabetes at all, and she's constantly just fainting onto the floor. But she's supposed to be completely capable. So it's shocking to me that she doesn't understand at all how academia works and is surprised that as an adjunct, she did not get the job as professor of theoretical physics at MIT. But of course she doesn't. So she runs away crying. Jack chases her, and there's this snowstorm, and so of course they're trapped in his apartment. So she has to sleep over. I should say one line I liked in this book that I liked is like, the person who gets the job is called George, but she's a girl. The whole time, Jack has been telling Elsie, like, you're not going to get this job. George has already got this job. And that's like a thing that happens in academia. And Elsie also should have known that. Like, if they're already hiring George, who flew in from California, of course the hiring committee is like, legally, we have to do 3 interviews. Legally, we have to, like, give them a chance, even though, like, we're hiring George. So, of course they're just going to have locals come in and do the interview so they don't have to pay for flights and hotels and stuff. So of course they just pick like acceptable candidates that are already in Boston. Like, of course Elsie wasn't going to get this job. It's like insane that she even thought she was, even for a second. But she meets George and she realizes she's a woman and she says something sexist. Like, of course you're probably sleeping with George and that's why she got the job or something. But then she immediately apologizes and she's like, that sucks. I shouldn't have said that. That fucking sucks. I hate that I said that. And I liked that. It was a very, like, women in STEM type of thing to happen. Like, she shouldn't have said it in the first place. But I liked that the author, like, called that attitude out and made her apologize. I liked that. That was nice. Anyway, but now Elsie is in Jack's apartment and they're snowed in. Oh no, so he's gonna sleep on the couch and she's gonna sleep on the bed, but of course they accidentally sleep in the bed together. Before that happens, she's digging through his nightstand like a complete weirdo. And she finds a picture, like a Polaroid, like a printed out photo, which is like, how do you even get that in 2024? Where does that come from? You have to do like a lot of work to get that into your home. And it's a picture of her from that party they were at where they played Go together. Can you imagine how frightening it would be if this guy who you hate, Jack and Elsie, hate each other, right? He has accused Elsie of faking her personality at every opportunity, a fact about her that should make him dislike her because of his whole childhood background of growing up with everyone lying to him. Why would he be attracted to a liar? And she hates him because she thinks he ruined her career 15 years ago, but also she just like lost this job and she thinks he played a role in that. And now she found a picture of her face in his nightstand. Maybe I don't read enough romance books to understand what's going on here, but this is terrifying and I don't like it. But of course she likes it, so they go on lots of dates. Did I already say that the theoretical models thing was the funniest thing in the book? Because the actual funniest thing in the book is her description of his physics tattoos. I'm on the record saying physics tattoos are not great. I did a whole video about how like everyone with an E equals MC squared tattoo is wrong and they should get it corrected. But I mean, I like tattoos. I don't think I could ever see a tattoo that would make me go, oh, I'm more attracted to you now than before I knew you had that tattoo. So I think maybe this isn't for me, but I do think tattoos can definitely make you less attractive. Let's read about his. His tattoos are beautiful. The Dirac equation, the electron cloud, beta decay, the Fibonacci spiral, kinematic models, astral planes, Drake's formula, the molecular structure of MBBA, black strokes of faded ink interlocked together in a beautiful painting. The entire foundation of modern physics is on his broad shoulder, wrapped around his large biceps. Oh, have I mentioned that he's like really big and she loves how big he is? And she's like small. So she's really small. Trace every line of it, every curve and every corner, and he lets me explore, vibrating with restraint, but he does. I've never been so selfish before, never taken up so much time for something that is only mine, and I think he knows. I think that's why he allows it. Remember how it was, I ask, learning them for the first time? The Schrodinger equation, the standard model. I want you to read this how I pictured it in my head, so I've made a little diagram. His tattoos are beautiful. The Dirac equation. Like, why? Are you going to forget it? Did you get it tattooed so you don't forget it? The Dirac equation? What? The electron cloud, beta decay, the Fibonacci spiral, kinematic models. I didn't know what kinematic models meant, so I just put like an orbit. Is that what you mean? Or like, do you have like the vibrating theory of gases on your body? Just like all of Lyman Spitzer's book on your body. Because you're going to forget it. Is that why? I think the author of this book thinks that astral planes is a physics word, but it's like a metaphysics word, like Eastern spiritualism and like crackpot astrology stuff. Astral planes not like a thing. It's just it's very funny that it says astral planes. That's not a physics word. Drake's formula is also not a physics thing. It's like the thing about aliens. Like it's a conversation that you could have, but it's not like a physics formula. Right. It's got the MBBA formula, which is on his bicep. I'm putting it on his back here because, like, that's what we're looking at. And then it says the Schrodinger equation, which, like, again, are you going to forget it? Or do you just think it's pretty? Like, why? And the last thing is the standard model, which I would like to pretend that he got, like, this entire ridiculous Lagrangian tattooed somewhere on his body. And it's, like, completely smushed and illegible because it's huge. If you're on my Patreon, that lambda I was talking about from the little a, little b experiment it's inside this Lagrangian somewhere. Bonus points if you can find it. It's not that I'm against tattoos. I have tattoos. I like tattoos. Physicists have tattoos, but physicists don't generally get tattoos of physics because they have other interests, actually. Oh, the third act reveal. The third act reveal. So I don't know act structure. Is this the third act? This book is so long. It's like the fifth act. Is that possible? George offers her a postdoc, and she goes to talk to her controlling advisor, who I haven't mentioned yet. And he's like, no, you can't take a postdoc. You should go right to the faculty position. And it turns out this whole time, the reason she's an adjunct is because this guy was like, postdocs aren't good enough for you. You can only do faculty jobs. And he's like controlling her moves. And because she's so pathetic as a person, like she's such a piece of garbage. She's never said no to her crazy wild family. She's never said no to this wild man trying to control her life. And now she's got this boyfriend who's also doing the same controlling thing, but the author frames it as sweet. It turns out that that's why she's an adjunct, and that's why she hasn't done anything. So when she's like, this is going to be a great opportunity for me, he's like, no. And then she learns that Jack's mother was a theoretical physicist just like her. And Jack's mother's advisor was the same guy. The same guy. Apparently, this entire group of people has never left Boston. She's like, you did the same thing to her. You stole her work and her ideas. And that's why you ruined theoretical physics, not Jack. This is your fault. And she like storms out. And she's mad at Jack for like not telling her about this or something. I don't really get why she's mad at him, because she already knows he wrote the article. She's mad at her advisors. So she's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then Jack publishes like an op-ed in the journal where he's like, 15 years ago, I made a mistake. And theoretical physics is good, actually. Actually, it's fine. And we shouldn't hate each other. Let's like bridge together. And so she reads it. She takes the postdoc. And that's supposed to be the win of the book. Like, yay. Instead of having a terrible job that's low pay, not enough to live in Boston, you now have a 3-year contract with not enough to live on in Boston, but like at least you have health insurance, I guess. What a happy ending to the story. And that's the end. She's a postdoc. The end. So this is the discussion part of the video. I am going to talk about physics. You can skip to this time step, but I briefly want to talk about fan fiction. Because this book is published Reylo fan fiction. Could you tell? I've seen Star Wars. I know Rey and I know Lo, and they don't have any chemistry. Do they? They have like one scene together, right? At the end? Well, how do you get from that to this? I'm sure that there's like a 6-hour video essay on YouTube. It seems like the Reylo fanfiction genre has like superseded like what Reylo was in the films so much that like I have no idea even what the hallmarks of a Reylo are. Like, is it just that he's big and she's small? Is that the difference? They both have childhood trauma, I guess. Is that it? Is that what makes it Reylo? This author specifically is very prolific in the Reylo fanfiction genre, and most of her books are like, you file off the serial numbers and you publish the fan fiction. And I would like to go on record saying that there's nothing wrong with that. I would think that the vast majority of published authors under 40 started in fan fiction because it just makes sense. Like, you're playing in a world that already exists. You already know the characters and you're just writing a story. Like, that's a good way to practice writing. That's a good way to get good at story, because you don't have to come up with the world. That's already done for you. And then you would use that to like hone your skill and get better at writing. You would get better at writing, probably. But if you're publishing 3 or 4 books a year, you're probably not editing that fan fiction too much. And so that's what I think happened here. Like, I don't read romance, but I do read a lot of genre fiction. Like, I read sci-fi, I read fantasy. So I understand that maybe there are tropes here, there's shorthand that I'm missing, where I'm looking for like character development. They're like, no, it's a trauma, childhood, that's all you need. This author doesn't really write characters. She just writes backstories. Elsie is this way because she has diabetes, which caused her family to be weird, which caused her to feel guilt about that, which caused her to choose a weird advisor who told her what to do all the time and she likes that, which caused her to get a boyfriend that tells her what to do all the time and she likes that. And it's like, but that's not character development. That's just like, here's this crazy, ridiculous, wild, abusive backstory, but she's like just quirky about it. And it's odd, especially because he also has a wild, abusive, like devastating history. And it's just like, no, he's fine. Like, he just grew up thinking his mom didn't love him, only to find out that everyone he knew was lying to him the whole time. And actually, his stepmom actually didn't love him. And now he's just like a dude. He's just totally fine. Like, everything's fine. It's totally good. He's just like a normal person with that just going on in the background. It's fine. That's why he is the way he is. Ali Hazelwood says this is based on a true story, which is just not true. The true story is that a guy wrote a fake, like, sociology paper. He was a physicist, and he submitted it, and it got published. And it was a critique on the low standards of the journal to publish whatever. But that guy was, like, kind of just being a dick. You can read his Wikipedia page. He seems like really proud of, like, mocking the humanities, which honestly would have been a better book. Like, if she was, like, a classics person and he was a physicist. It seems to me what happened is, like, she found this true story. She was like, oh, but he can't be an asshole because he's the love interest. So what if there's, like, a sad backstory? Like, the reason he did it is because his mommy died, and that's the reason. And she doesn't really build on how that would affect him as a person. She doesn't really explore, like, Elsie's been faking her personality for 30 years. Like, won't that affect her psychologically? Won't, like, having this breakthrough and, like, finally standing up for herself, like, cause a breakdown? Like, won't she get bangs or something? No? It's weird. It's like, instead of writing a character, she wrote a backstory and, like, thinks that that's good enough. But maybe that's the romance genre. Like, if I'm reading fantasy and someone is like, this is an elf, and they don't say anything else about that elf, like, I know kind of what that elf is like because I read a lot of fantasy. So, like, I will make assumptions based on you saying that's an elf. So maybe it's the same thing. Like, maybe you're just like, oh, he's, like, grew up in a crazy abusive home where everyone lied to him and his mom didn't love him, and then he found out it wasn't his mom. That old hat, that character, that standard character. Okay, maybe that's it. These books do amazing. Like, these sell so many copies. Like, these books are New York Times bestsellers. And if you go read the reviews, people love these books. Like, these books always get 5 stars. Like, people love these books. So these must be very good examples of the romance genre, which means I just don't get it. And that's totally fine. Like, these are not for me, but that doesn't mean they're bad romance books, right? Right? So I asked someone who likes romance books, my friend Janice. She's a librarian and she also reads romance novels, like, a lot, so she knows the genre. So I said, you know, what's your opinion on this book? Was this a good book? And we read it for our book club. So hi, Janice. Thinking of romance in terms of fantasy, romance readers are typically not assuming that everything is realistic. Setting and character professions should be believable, but most authors aren't billing themselves as experts. For example, 2 popular romance subgenres are suspense and historical. Characters might work for the FBI, be in the witness protection, or be a duke's daughter in the Regency romance. The reader will forgive inaccuracies because the author is not billing themselves as an FBI agent or a historian, and generally most readers don't have backgrounds in those fields to determine the errors. Now, thinking of romance in these terms, love theoretically is clearly a conventional romance. The main character has somewhat uncontrolled diabetes, has a fraught family dynamic, and low sense of identity, but she changes for the better after getting to know the main male character, and works on herself to both benefit her life outside of her relationship and also this romantic relationship she has decided to pursue. The main male character is written to be completely enamored by the female main character. And here's her opinion. Unfortunately, I found the female character unlikable, the male main character unbelievable, even with the suspension of disbelief that genre fiction will sometimes require, and the plot plodding. Romance novels do not need to be over 400 pages. Contemporary romance doesn't require world building, and romance with fantasy paranormal elements typically have light world building. Personally, my preference is 250 to 350 pages. The main male character's background doesn't align with the female main character. He hates lying and was abandoned by all maternal figures. Why would he be attracted to someone who lies to everyone, including herself, and won't commit to him? The female main character is clearly not ready to be in a relationship. She doesn't know herself. She lies. She's too angry at a mistake the main male character made when he was a teenager. The final point refers to this novel's third act conflict. Thank you, Janice. It's the third act, not a fifth act. Thank you. This is a common plot device to keep the tension in a romance novel after the couple gets together. Some kind of breakup or other stumbling block will appear for the characters to defeat, resolve, make up, leading to the happy ever after conclusion. The novel could have benefited from a significant edit to reduce extraneous stories like the fake dating portion. Some genre wins. The main male character was sweet and the romantic scenes swoony. The author was clearly having fun writing the story. And then she gives some examples of what she would consider good romance novels. If you are interested in romance after watching me be mean about it for 30 minutes, I'm sorry. And I think that's it. I didn't like this, but this isn't my genre, and that's okay. It's hard to get into genre fiction. It's hard for someone with no experience reading sci-fi to just sit down and read a space opera, right? So it's hard for me to read this romance and be like, ooh, interesting. It's obviously that these are good, and I'm wrong, right? These are killing it. People love these. So I've never written a book. I've never had 8 New York Times bestsellers in 3 years, because apparently you can write books that fast. I'm obviously the person who doesn't understand. So let me tell you my opinion, but first, a little compliment sandwich. I already said I liked that part where George got the job and then Elsie called her a whore and then she was like, oh, that sucks, I shouldn't have said that. I liked that. I do think that the examples of subtle sexism in physics in here were pretty realistic. I noticed a lot of the reviews were overwhelmed by them, but it kind of is a daily thing. So I understand why the author put so much of that in. And also, I really like how modern romance books are very colorful. All of my books are blue and black, and so I feel this will sit very nicely. And this is a really high quality book. It's got a good flop because it's really long, and sometimes really long books don't do that. So Good on that. Good on the publisher. It's a nice book. I have some light criticism on the academia portion. The first is that the plot doesn't make sense. We know from the jump she's not going to get the job. She's an adjunct. I have a whole video about that. And it's almost the main character doesn't know that. And it's strange because she's supposed to be very capable and able and the smartest person. But she doesn't understand how her job works. It's strange. The author does try to explain that away by being no, she had this advisor that was keeping her and not letting her apply for postdocs, but that's not how it works. When you get a PhD, you have a committee, and there's 3 to 5 people on that committee, and yeah, you see your advisor 3 to 4 times a week, but you see your committee at least once a year. And your committee would be Elsie, where have you applied to postdocs? I notice you haven't asked me for any recommendation letters. What's happening with this? Because they are also vested in how well you do, how your career goes. They want to make sure you get a job so they can put that on their own CV. Look at this student I mentored who's now a postdoc or works in industry or whatever. And Elsie doesn't mention any of that. She's just oh, he told me there weren't any postdocs. He was postdocs don't exist. And it doesn't make any sense. And it's little things like that that really threw me off. There is discussion on the internet about whether or not Allie Hazelwood, that's a pseudonym, whether she's actually a professor. And I don't want, if she says she's a professor, she's a professor. It's just that there are weird things like that where it's she calls her advisor a mentor throughout the whole book. She's he's my mentor. And that's very Harvard Business School language and not at all physics STEM school language. He's your advisor. He's your thesis advisor. That's what you would call him. And it's very strange. I guess it's assuming that the people reading this book don't know anything about academia. So like it doesn't matter. You're just like, oh, he wouldn't let her apply to a postdoc. Oh my goodness. And it's just like, that's not how it works. I did say I don't want to debate whether or not she's a professor, but I will say I hope that she's not a professor, because the author of this book seems to really hate students. Like all of the main characters who are aspiring or professors, like they work with students, they have grad students, they all talk about how much they hate teaching and how much they hate their students. And it's just like, that's what your job is. You don't have to be a professor. Why would you want to be a professor? Why would you apply to be a professor if you hate students? There's this thing the author does that at first I thought it was going to be cute, where she has emails that Elsie is receiving from the students she's teaching as an adjunct. And the thing about adjuncting is that you're teaching like 100 or 200 level courses. So you have like non-traditional students who are like taking their first class in like 15 years. You have like high schoolers who just graduated and are now taking their first ever college course. And it's just like a lot of people who don't really understand how college works. So when you're adjuncting, or like I was a TA in grad school for like 100 level classes, you get a lot of weird emails because the students don't know how college works. So like you'll just get an email that's like, I have a colonoscopy on Wednesday. And that's very funny because like, why would you tell your TA that? Why would you tell me that? There's nothing I can do about that. What they meant to say was like, I'm going to miss class on Thursday because I have a medical procedure the day before and I have to rest or something, right? They don't know how to ask for help. They don't know what they're asking. Like they're so used to being in high school, or like they have no idea how classes work anymore because they took high school classes 15 years ago. And I think it's like sweet. And it's something that's nice about being like a professor to those new students. Like you're kind of helping them on their way. And you do not see that when you're teaching like a 400 level class, because by then everybody kind of knows that it's a job, really. It's not really like high school. And I started this book and I saw those emails and I was like, oh, she's going to talk about the thing. But it wasn't like isn't this so sweet? Isn't this a nice thing about being a professor? You get to help people. It was very much like, she hates students. She hates that they send stupid emails. She hates them. She hates that she has to teach them. She hates that she has to grade their papers. There's a scene where like Jack wants her to go to a party and she's like, I have to grade all these essays. And he's like, just give them A's. That's what I do. And it just like, it sucks. Like, you don't have to be an adjunct. You could go do anything else. Like, why are you doing this if you also hate the students? Like, you're not in academia anymore. Being an adjunct isn't going to help you get a job. Like, you don't have health insurance, Elsie. You hate the students. What are you doing? Why? Also, it kind of made me wonder, like, maybe your students are sending you so many confused emails because you say you're teaching classes like thermodynamics and modern cosmology and quantum mechanics, and yet all you're doing is assigning them essays. Like, she's literally only assigning essays. She's like, you have a 2-page paper on modern cosmology due, double spaced. And it's like, what class are you teaching? Why would you ever assign an essay to a science course? What are they going to write? Like the dictionary definition of cosmology? Like, what are they writing a paper on? What? That's not how you would assign problem sets. And then you would grade the problem sets. But since it's a 100 level class, you would probably just have like that online software do it. Like, why are you assigning essays? Like, why are you making more work for yourself? Why would a UMass like astronomy major expect to be in a class called modern cosmology writing a 2-page paper? The author of this book is a scientist, so she knows. So why was this an edit? Was the publisher like, no one's going to understand what a problem set is. No one's going to understand that you assign homework. Just call it an essay. It doesn't make any sense. That's probably why you're getting so many emails. The students are confused. Something else I find weird about the representation of academia in this book is that the grad students and professors are kind of like hanging out. Like they're drinking together. They're at parties together. Like the graduate students are like weeping. It's really weird because I feel like that's a very 1970s version of academia, where now we're trying to get people to realize that it is a job and you shouldn't probably drink with your students, and you should probably treat them with respect because they're your employees and they deserve a living wage and all that stuff. So it's weird to read this from someone who also went through academia so recently. What's especially weird is there's a scene in this book where Elsie's with Jack at a party with friends from California, and I think it's a reference to the previous book. Like, the characters make a cameo, like a Marvel situation. And the girl's like, I actually fell in love with the guy who was a professor, and I was just a grad student. Scandal. And it's like, what the fuck? Ew, no, that's not funny. Is that seriously the plot? And then you can see them trying to make it okay, where it's like, but you weren't in my class. You weren't my student. Ew, that's not okay. Gross. And then when you combine that with all the reviews of this book, where they're like, the characters are always the same. I love it. This grad student character that got taken advantage of by her professor, also like incapable and pathetic, like Elsie, the main character of this book. Like Elsie, who can't make a decision and is basically like manhandled by the love interest. That's how the other character also is, except he's a professor in the department she's a student in. Ew. The last thing that really bothered me about the academic portion was that Elsie is complaining about like the real life implications of being an adjunct. She doesn't have enough money. Like, her apartment is like moldy. She's talking about rats and stuff in her apartment. She doesn't have enough money to buy insulin because her diabetes is just wildly uncontrolled, and she's fainting all the time. Like, she's suffering medical consequences of being an adjunct. And then she gets a postdoc and she's just like, I did it. I won. Now I don't have to worry about that. It's wild. Like, never once in this job interview for being a professor is she like, does MIT have adjuncts? Or are you guys against that? Because I have a problem with people adjuncting because they can't afford to live. No. She's just like pulling herself up by her bootstraps. If you're an adjunct and you can't afford to treat your diabetes, maybe you should just get a job at MIT. It's really weird. And it wouldn't be weird, very similar to the sex work. Like, it wouldn't be weird if she didn't mention it. But she talks so much about how horribly adjuncts are treated. She goes to this wealthy professor's house and sees how big it is and is like, man, there's such a disparity. There's a class issue here. And then she's just like, but not for me, because now I work at MIT, so I don't have to worry about that. Bootstraps, baby. It's weird. It's weird. Like, I wouldn't say anything about it if you hadn't have spent the first 150 pages of the book talking about how horrible the adjuncts are treated. It's very similar to Harry Potter 3. Have you ever read it? There's like this subplot where Hermione is like, I did not know the house elves were like enslaved. This is terrible. We should free them. Like, they're intelligent creatures. This is bad. And all the other wizards are like, you're so silly. They like it. They like being slaves. If they weren't slaves, they would just be in the streets getting drunk all the time. That's why. And like, the author of that book is like, nailed it. See? And that's very similar to what happens in this book, where Elsie is like, it's so horrible being an adjunct. And then as soon as she's out of it, she's like, see, I don't need this. If you're an adjunct, just bootstraps it. Bootstraps straight into healthcare. So this is the section where I talk about the physics things that annoyed me. If you've skipped the whole last bit to get to this point, I do want to say again that I think part of the reason I don't like this book is because I don't like the romance genre, and that doesn't mean anything about people who like the romance genre. And if you like that, that's great. These books do numbers. People like these books. I am upset about the inaccuracies in physics, but like, not the books. Like, I think anything that gets people reading is great. And it's totally fine to like romance books. I'm not going to expect every single person in the world to read like hard sci-fi. It's the same way with romance. As long as people reading, it's great. The physics inaccuracies are the problem. Okay, that's where we're at, right? So the first thing that bothers me is like the puns. Like, I feel like this is just the stereotype of how people think scientists act. But like, scientists are normal people with other interests, and they don't just talk about like science puns, and they don't just say science jargon in normal conversation. She's doing this teaching presentation, and have I mentioned that he's really big and she's really small? And he comes into the room, and her, like, brain, because, I don't know, sometimes this book is, like, the main character talking to you, and sometimes it's just inside of her head. It's very strange. But she says, he's a giant mountain of muscles, after all, and there's probably a physics equation that explains his annoying habit of becoming the center of mass of every room he burdens with his presence. And it's just like, why would she think like that? That's not... There is an equation for center of mass. And you probably know it, Elsie. What? Why? The worst one is at the end of that teaching demo. She's like, and that's the only thing that matters here. Unless you multiply it by the speed of light squared, and then it energies. There's a character in this book who's supposed to be like the kooky, like, tenured professor that's like old, and he's always making physics jokes. I'll read one to you. Things will turn around, Jack. You know that experimental physics is experiment to be hard. Theoretical physics, too. Doesn't it sometimes make you theory-eyed, Dr. Hanaway? Like, I get that the character's supposed to be cringy, but, like, you can't just have your character be cringy so you can get your scientific jargon quota in it. Like, this isn't how people talk. All throughout middle school, my Halloween costume was the duality of light. You're a physicist, Elsie. You should know better than to throw around the word fact when quantum mechanics exists. What's your interpretation then? Har, 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 har. There's a scene where she's talking about what happened to theoretical physics after he published that article when he was a child. Even Oprah talked about it. The Jonathan Smith-Turner affair, the theoretical hoax, the physics scandal. Einstein rolled in his grave. Newton puked up his apple. Feynman quietly stepped in a tank of liquid helium. Thank God Newton wasn't under a coconut tree. You're comparing your brother's relationship to a non-polar covalent bond. The second physics thing I hated about this book is that there's no physics in it. It's just like jargon. So like the chapter titles are just like flux, circular motion, physics word, physics. And it's annoying. Like, why would you write a book about physicists and not mention physics at all? Like, just saying physics words doesn't make physics happen. It reminded me a lot of the Big Bang Theory show, where it's like they're not talking about science, but it's just in a science setting. So you get the feeling that it's kind of sciencey, but like it's not at all in any way. Except you tell me the chapter is called electromagnetism, and I am reading that chapter being like, okay, why is it called this? What specifically is happening? And I was just like, I was stressing so much about this. Like, obviously the author just like found a list of physics words and just put them as the titles. But like, I was sitting there like, okay, it's called nuclear fission. I know what nuclear fission is. What's happening in this chapter that makes it about nuclear fission? She just goes to talk to one of the people on the committee. That's it. There's nothing to do with nuclear fission. And that just made me angry. I probably spent 10 chapters being like, I don't understand. Am I missing why this is called chain reaction? I don't understand, but it's nothing. Googled physics words and found a list and made those the chapter titles, except there's a chapter title that's harmonic motion, and that's the one where they do it. They have sex. And I thought that was funny, except it's called complex harmonic motion, which, like, I mean, that's a thing, but no one ever says that. Nobody ever says complex harmonic motion. Like, you have simple harmonic motion, and you have not simple harmonic motion, but you wouldn't describe it as complex. You would say, like, this is a damped harmonic oscillator, or you would say it's like a chaotic system. It's just complex harmonic motion is not a thing I hear people talk about. It made me think that she found the list of physics words and then saw that it said simple harmonic motion and was like, no. That doesn't sound smart enough. Make it complex harmonic motion. But what's really funny, simple harmonic motion looks like this. And complex harmonic motion kind of looks like this. And like, which would you prefer? Like, steady, predictable movements? Like, I'm not a sex expert. I don't know. I don't want to kink shame you. But I know in my preference, like, would you want like steady, predictable, like smooth movements? Or would you like wacky, inflatable tube man movements? This is not, in my opinion, how I would describe sex. Complex harmonic motion. It's very silly. The next thing in physics I hated was the Feynman sex quote. Straight to jail. Ew. No, like, you can't say you're writing a STEMinist, a word that doesn't exist, a STEMinist novel, and then be like, I'm going to use the Feynman sex quote to prove that I'm a strong, independent woman, just perpetuating the sexist stereotypes of physicists. Great. Perfect. I'm sure you made the female grad students in that class feel very welcome when they were like, oh no, it's another female physicist quoting the notoriously sexist male physicist quotes. Yay. I'm glad that the new professor who's going to work here decided it was important to make the sexist loser in my class feel comfortable instead of calling him a loser to his face. What a great role model you're being for the women in your class by doing the Feynman sex quote. Straight to jail, $0, nasty. I don't like it. You've just introduced the Feynman sex quote to a whole new generation of women. Great. I'm glad that you've done that. What a STEMinist powerhouse. Fantastic. And just putting in italics. Have I mentioned that there are so many italics in this book? Just like randomly. Random words are italicized. It's infuriating. Just it's like a title of a book, but then it's just like an inner thought. And it's just so confusing. It reminds me of that Roger Ebert quote. But just because you put in italics, like, Feynman definitely called all women whores. So I don't like that I had to use this quote, but I sure had to show. It's like, no. You couldn't think of a better way in this imaginary situation that you've written. So these are increasing in hateability of the physics things in the book. And here we are. It's so stupid. It doesn't make any sense. You can't have physics without theorists and also experiments. They work together. It's the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard in my life to be like, those theorists sure do hate those experimentalists. So there is a version of a person who's like, I'm a theorist. I don't ever have to do experiments. Haha. And that loser of a person doesn't ever actually become a physicist because you can't do physics without experiment. But that version of a person probably got that piece of information from the Big Bang Theory TV show on CBS. And I just have a feeling that the research for this book was also done by watching the Big Bang Theory on CBS, because there was the main character was like, I'm a real physicist, I'm a theorist. And that was the joke. Like, that's a stupid thing to say. It doesn't make any sense. Like, imagine you like do R&D for like a car company and like you do simulations of like bumpers for safety. And you're designing a new bumper. You could call yourself a theoretical car manufacturer. Like, you're looking at safety standards and you're coming up with a new model of car bumper. Then you test it theoretically in a simulation. And then a separate group of people, obviously, you could call them experimental R&D car designer people. They make that bumper and they crash it and they video it and they look at what's going on and they see if it's good. And imagine if you were the theorist in the car department and the experimentalist was like, would you like to come see the lab? And you were like, no, ew, I'm a theorist. You know that thing I've been working on for the last 8 years designing in my office? No, I don't want to see it in action. I'm not interested in experimental car design. Ew. Like, you see how that doesn't make any fucking sense? Like, if you're a theorist and you're working on your she doesn't ever describe it. It kills me that she never describes what they do. If you're working on your crystals, you happen to be in a job interview, and the guy you're talking to works on crystals experimentally, that's the best day of your life. Like, you're so excited to see that side of it. And if he's like, you want to see the labs, you're going to shit your pants in excitement. You're not going to be like, ew, a lab. Like, it just, like, I'm trying to explain how stupid it is, but it's so stupid that I can't explain how stupid it is. They develop models and like they do math and they do computer simulations, but they do that with data, which they get from the experimentalists who they talk to and work with all the time. You can't do an experiment without a theorist, and you can't do theory without experiment. It doesn't make any sense to even suggest that there was a rift between these groups of people, and somehow for 15 years they were just like, you know how all theorists hate it doesn't make any sense. You know Claire Saffitz? She's like a recipe developer. You could call her a chef theorist. She makes recipes. She writes cookbooks. She doesn't see the people make her food. She just theorizes. She writes it down, right? And then you have like chefs who work in restaurants. They like make the food and they give it to the people and they get immediate feedback. They're like the experimentalists, right? Imagine if Claire Saffitz wrote a recipe and then a chef at a restaurant was like, we would love to use this recipe in our kitchen. And she's like, you would use my recipe in your kitchen? It's a purely theoretical recipe. It doesn't make any sense. It's so stupid. You know, physicists, they might describe themselves as a theorist or an experimentalist, but they all work together. They all do both. This is the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. You can't watch The Big Bang Theory, universally panned by scientists in the field, and be like, this is how it is, right? What really bothers me, Sally Hazelwood is a neuroscientist, a field where they have theorists. You can be a theoretical neuroscientist. That's a job. They do simulations. They also have experimentalists. She knows that. That's her field. Would she write a book where the theoretical neuroscientist was like, ew, of course I don't want to see your data from cutting open people's brains. Ew, no. I'm a theorist. I don't want to look at a brain. It doesn't matter what's happening in brains. These are two totally disparate fields that can totally operate without each other, obviously. Like, she knows this. What is happening? It really bothers me. It's just like the plot of this book is nonsense. Okay, here's the last physics thing that bothers me. Yeah, I'm ranking these in order of like what bothers me with increasing botherness, and this is the most bothered I was in this book. And this happens when she's waiting for a rejection from MIT. Like, she knows she didn't get the job, and she says this: I'm in the middle of what's rapidly becoming a semesterly endeavor, relearning Noether's theorem to be able to teach it to mostly snoring classroom at 8 a.m., only to forget it by the time my 9:30 thermo lecture comes around. I feel like this is emblematic of a problem with the whole book. Like, she says Noether's theorem, and it's just physics jargon. She doesn't say what it is. She doesn't say why she would be teaching it to two different sections of thermo. And it's just like, what is the point? Like, why is this a physics book? You don't do any physics in this book. You don't learn any physics. It's just like a list of words. Noether's theorem, local thermodynamic equilibrium, flux, Poynting vectors. Like, did you learn physics just now? Is that how you learn physics? Like, it's just a list. It's like so offensive to call this a science book. Like, writing this book, she was like, what's a theorem that she could talk about? No physicist would forget Noether's theorem. That doesn't make any sense. It's not like she's teaching Noether's theorem to a graduate level mechanics class. She's teaching it, she's an adjunct. She's teaching sophomores or freshmen. So she's not going to do a proof. She's just going to say in words what Noether's theorem is. And yet she doesn't the author of this book, doesn't feel the need to explain that to her audience. Why even mention it? Tell me what Noether's theorem is. Look it up. What's the point of this? So Noether's theorem is a very important physics idea. It says that when a system has symmetry, you have a conserved quantity. And there are so many examples. Like, it's so important. No one would ever forget it. It's insane that that's a sentence in this book. She's a professional theoretical physicist. She didn't forget Noether's theorem. For example, time has symmetry. Like, you use a telescope, you can look at galaxies, and you observe that across time, like, the laws of physics behave the same way. Because of the symmetry of time, we observe that the universe is obeying the laws of physics 14 billion years to now. From that, we can infer that energy is conserved. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Now, that was words, but you can prove that with math. I'm not going to do that today. That's not the point of this video. Why couldn't the author of this book just say that? Here I go have to remind myself about Noether's theorem. Here's what it is. It says when you have a symmetry, it's related to a conservation law of a system. Like, relate it to the thing in the book. Like, the love is timeless. So, like, the energy spent on the relationship is conserved. Like, isn't that what this should be? This is a STEMinist book. Shouldn't we learn some physics in the book? What is the point if you're just going to name drop random theorems and random physics words if they're not related to what's happening? It alienates the audience, and it's pointless. But also, Emmy Noether is the most famous female mathematician ever. Her theorem is one of the most important things in physics. Noether's theorem is how we get, like, gauge invariance and stuff. It's arguably one of the most important theorems in physics. Like, you could definitely make a case for it. And in this book, that's supposed to be STEMinist, a word that does not exist, why doesn't the author mention that Emmy Noether is a woman? Why doesn't the author talk about how Emmy Noether, a woman in STEM, had to teach at a university without pay, which is very similar to what Elsie is doing now as an adjunct professor? You see how those two things are related? You see how you could write that into a book? What is the point? The women reading this are trying to learn something, and you just, Noether's theorem, that's it. That's all you have to say. That's it? That's it? Anything about Emmy Noether? What is the point? The reviews for this book are insane. Like, everyone loves this book. Like, 5 stars over and over. I will read anything she writes. Give me more. She needs to quit her job so she can write more of these. People love this. So why is my problem that the physics isn't good? Maybe nobody cares. Here's my problem. So there is a subsection of the reviews that talk about the physics in the book. The first in this subsection are people who are like, the physics went right over my head. I just didn't understand anything they were talking about. The story was good. I didn't understand any of the science stuff. And that makes me really sad because there's no science. There's no science in this book. There's no science in this book. It's just a list of words, you know? Like, that's not physics. It's beta decay, pentaquark, Lorentz contraction. Did you learn physics just now? Or did it go over your head? Because it didn't go over your head. I just said words. And if you don't know what those words mean, you're not going to know if you're missing it from context clues or if you're stupid or if it's just a list of words. And that makes me really sad. I don't think people should read this and feel bad about themselves because they didn't get the science, because there was no science in this book. And yet, if you look at it, it's just like gloriously nerdy and sexy. It's not. It's not nerdy at all. It's just a list of words. And that makes me really sad. And the popularity of these books point to the popularity of this idea. So maybe we could just try harder. Like, there's stuff here. Why not actually talk about science? Why mention Emmy Noether if you're not even going to mention Emmy Noether? Like, I don't understand. There's a second subsection that is more worrisome in this like type of review where they talk about the science, which they say that they learned so much And I don't want to dox any of these people, but I would really like to respond to all these reviews and just ask for like a list. Like, what specifically did you learn from this book? Because there's no physics in the book. What did you learn? Like, I'm serious. Give me like a post-it note where you write down what you learned, because there's nothing in there. There's no science in the book. So what did you learn? I did get an idea, because in a bunch of these reviews where they talk about how they learned so much, they mention that they're so glad they read this book before they saw Oppenheimer, the biopic about the true story of the making of the atomic bomb at Los Alamos. They're so glad they read this book before they saw that movie, because they were able to understand the movie. And I was very confused. And I found it on TikTok. There were a bunch of TikToks.
I just saw Oppenheimer and I was like, maybe I won't have enough scientific context to really follow the movie. But I read this bad boy right here and I knew everything I needed to follow along.
I finally went to go see Oppenheimer, and I got so excited when they started talking about the difference between experimental and theoretical physicists, because all I could think about was love theoretically, and I was like, Ali Hazelwood already taught me about this. Oh my god, I'm so excited. So the next time someone's like, those romance books are just rotting your brain, I learned more about physics in love theoretically than I did watching Oppenheimer, So
I just got out of Oppenheimer, and the whole theoretical physics and experimental physics, was it not giving love theoretically? The experimentalist literally looked like Jack. Shout out Ali Hazelwood for doing it first.
Here's what I think they learned from this book. Physics exists. It is a field of study. You can be an experimental physicist or you can be a theoretical physicist. And they learned that these two groups of people hate each other. So when they went to watch Oppenheimer, they saw that there were theorists and also experimentalists there, and they were like, that's the thing I know. What's wild to me is that they would have that opinion watching that movie, because that's very specifically probably the most famous event where theorists and experimentalists had to work together and all of their skills were needed. And of course they have to work together. It doesn't make any sense that they wouldn't. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense that they wouldn't like each other or work together well. It doesn't make any sense. And I think that's a problem. People are reading this book, and the only thing they take away, the absolute only thing they learned, is that theorists and experimentalists exist and they hate each other. And that doesn't make any sense. And that makes me feel bad, because the target market for this book is 15-year-old girls who read romance novels, and the girls picking this up are probably interested in STEM, and that's great. And they probably enjoy the story where they're interested in STEM and they find a boyfriend who's also interested in that, and that's also great. But what if this girl goes to undergrad and she's like, a theorist, I hate those because I want to do experiment, and then everyone laughs at her, and then she drops out and she doesn't do STEM now because that's what she learned from this book. That's the problem. Ali Hazelwood, that is the problem. Look at me. When this becomes a movie on Netflix, people aren't going to like it. It doesn't matter. Take the check. It's so easy to fix this. Just give them different research areas. She's a cosmologist. He's a solid-state experimentalist. They don't like each other because they're competing for funding. And she gives a talk and she's like, actually, my theoretical idea could be observed in this solid-state experimental physics setup. And he's like, oh my God, we could work together? Two separate fields working together? That's it. That's the small change. And also get rid of the crazy, terrible backstories. Why are your characters so sad? And it would be fine. Just do that. Like, what is this? Why? The last thing is kind of stupid. The main character, she talks about how much she likes cheese, like a lot. Like that's her whole personality, is that she likes cheese. And like there's a point where they drop the cheese on the floor, and even though their apartment is full of mold and also rats, they pick the cheese up off the floor and they just like rinse it off and eat it anyway. But there's a line in this book where they're talking like just like it's like a, oh, what would be the best thing ever to do? And she says, buy 5 pounds of pecorino from Whole Foods and just eat it. Pecorino is not an eating cheese. Pecorino is a seasoning cheese. The author of this book is from Italy. Doesn't she know that? Like, you put a pecorino on pasta. You don't take a bite of pecorino. Like, maybe if you're like the Barefoot Contessa, you would make a cheese board and there would be like a lot of different cheeses and then like a teeny tiny pecorino is like the hard cheese. But if you were like, I'm gonna eat some cheese, you're not picking pecorino. Like, that's insane. That's wild. Pecorino is not an eating cheese. I just, like, surely to make it her character to the point where cheese is referenced so many times, surely the author also likes cheese. Has she ever eaten pecorino? Am I wrong? Am I wrong about how you eat pecorino? Because this is what stood out the most. This is the biggest inaccuracy in the book. In the book where experimental physicists don't like theoretical physicists and somehow it's possible for either of them to work without the other, the biggest inaccuracy is that she just wants to buy pecorino as if it's an eating cheese. It's not an eating cheese. It's just not.